Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Enterprise Adventures Finance for Beginners Masterclass. From financial beginner to financial boss. And we hope you'll all be financial bosses at the end of this masterclass. We're here with Hannah, your expert for today. And of course, me, Elizabeth, who you might know already. So before we begin, we want to start with a quick icebreaker question. And I want you to write your answers in the chat bar. What comes to your mind when you hear the word finance? It can be anything you can think of. So please write your answers in the chat bar and we can read them out. You can be as creative as you want. Lifeline of business. Yes, that's very good, Naveen. I think finance is the lifeline of business, and we'll go into that in more detail. Money management. Thank you, Pratham. Yes, managing your money, keeping everything in order. That's very important. Anyone else? Deisha says, finance indicates your expenditure and money-related schemes. Very good. Ishant says, all about records management of money. Yes, keeping records is something we definitely suggest that you do on the Enterprise Adventure. You write everything down. Anyone else? What comes to your mind when you hear the word finance? There's no right or wrong answer. We've heard some good suggestions already. But if you don't know, that's also okay. This is finance for beginners after all. So you might not know very much about finance, but you might be interested in learning more. So here's an even simpler question to bring it right down to the level of a teenager, because some of you might be a little confused about the finance related questions in the Enterprise Adventure, and that's okay. I know that I was no good with finance when I was a teenager. What kinds of things do you like to spend money on? So that could be anything you want. What kind of things do you like to spend money on? So write your answer in the chat bar. For me, I like to spend quite a lot of my money on cooking ingredients and food. Naveen says, needs, comforts, and finally luxuries. That's a really good way of putting it, because you have your needs, the things that you need the most. You have the things that are comfortable to you, and then you have luxuries, the little treats. So this masterclass will all be about budgeting. And budgeting is not only useful for a household, but it is also useful for a business. So anyone else? Because then we're going to move on. Okay. All right. One more. Yes, thank you very much. So we're going to introduce our expert today, Hannah McLaughlin. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Hannah?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I have to say, I'm pretty impressed by some of the answers you guys put forth in the icebreaker. Clearly, we have some finance quizzes in our presence, but I'm actually coming at you live from the United States. So very excited to be able to lead today's session. And I know that we have folks from all over the globe on. So incredibly appreciative that you guys were able to make the time. And I hope today's session is informative and maybe for some of you a great refresher on really just how to read and fill out P&L statement. But it's great to meet all of you.
Yes, thank you so much, Hannah. And we're really happy that you're with us today as well. So we're going to ask you some questions. So it'll be a little mini interview. So
All
you'll
right.
get to know a little bit more about what Hannah does and what her day-to-day life looks like. So let's ask a few questions. Our first question is, what do you do within finance?
So it's a great question. And I have to say that the world of finance can be pretty big and pretty complex. But what I do specifically within finance is I work in a subsector called private equity. What does that mean? Essentially, me and a team of people, we buy companies, we work with their management teams and the people who have built the businesses to improve the company, with the ultimate goal of eventually selling the company to a suitable buyer or in the public market in order to make a profit or a return. And it's definitely an exciting job. Definitely lots to do, a lot of deal volume, a lot of new opportunities to look at, but definitely a very rewarding and challenging experience. And on a personal note, love the travel aspect as well. I get to travel all over the States. I've traveled in Europe as well, and I've met a bunch of really impressive and smart management teams as well. So I've learned a lot in over the past 6 years that I've been working in this industry.
That's a really interesting answer. And we know that a lot of adventurers are interested in travel because they put it in their dreams for the future answers. So this is one way that you can get to do that. So next question. What inspired you to pursue this field?
Yeah, I think it's something that was almost unintentional and something that I had walked into. But for a little bit of background, when I was at university, I was involved with a lot of different organizations, and one of them was a female finance group where eventually I became president of our university's chapter. And really, it was through the mentors and the friends that I've accumulated during my years in college that suggested that given my economics degree, and given my extracurricular involvement, maybe finance would be a suitable initial job. So, like most things, you don't really know if you necessarily will like it until you try it. So, I interned at a very large bank when I was at university, absolutely loved the people, had really exciting projects, and the prospect of being able to have such a big impact at such a junior level was ultimately why I chose this path. And the rest is kind of history, and it's definitely a long path forward, but definitely one that I'm very excited about.
Thank you for that, Hannah. Yes, interning is another way forward if you're interested in learning more about finance. Next question. What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny, I think private equity can sound very vague, but what I love most about the job is the fact that there really is no standard day to day. It really just depends on the types of opportunities that you look at. But at a high level, we are always looking at new companies that we potentially want to buy. We're conducting market research and industry research. And with existing transactions, a lot that comprises data analysis, talking to management teams and executives and banks, and really just figuring out the best way to structure our deals. And on a lighter note as well, definitely very involved with broader initiatives across the firm and ensuring that we continue to evolve as a firm culturally, and also with respect to diversity and ensuring that there's a diversity of people and a diversity of ideas. So definitely a lot of the day to day looks very different, but it's a lot of financial analysis and definitely just a lot of creativity at looking at new opportunities.
Yes, that's really, valuable to hear because market research, which you mentioned, is something that adventurers do a lot of throughout the missions. And it's really important, not only in analyzing your customers and competitors, but also in a financial field. So for those of you who just joined us, Hannah works in private equity. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can look it up. And yes, if you have any questions for Hannah, please put them in the chat bar or in the Q&A, and we're going to answer them later on. So feel free to, if anything pops up into your mind, just put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll answer them later. So you can ask them whenever you want. So next question, what are the most important lessons you have learned throughout your career?
Yeah, I can definitely say I've learned a lot over the past couple of years since I've started working. But first and foremost, don't be afraid to ask for help and always try to be the best team player that you can possibly be. It's good to keep in mind that, no man or woman is an island, and it's important to lean on others. And it's important to be also open minded to new ideas and new perspectives. Secondly, be brave and speak up. If you have a great idea or if there's a project that you would like to explore, it's definitely a valuable experience just to be able to speak up, even if it's a little bit nerve wracking. It's always good to put forth your ideas. And lastly, just have fun with it, and constantly make sure that you're having a good time, and it's a career that's fulfilling for you and something that you're very passionate about. That is ultimately what sustains you in your profession. But at a high level, I think those are kind of the three big key takeaways that I've learned, at least to date. I'm sure there are many more lessons to learn in the future.
That's really, three main takeaways that are extremely useful, and always be brainstorming is, a great lesson to have. Always be trying to push yourself further while still, enjoying yourself. And I think that's a good takeaway from that. Finally, what are the main types of financial statements you should know when running a business?
So I actually believe there are quite a few different financial statements to understand, but I would say that the three most important, at least especially what I've come across, are the income or the P&L statement, as you probably know it, a cash flow statement, and a balance sheet. So we will probably not get into cash flow statement and balance sheet in this session just due to timing, but and we'll focus most of our energy on the P&L statement, which is what you guys have been seeing across your different projects. But in summary, the difference between these three statements is that the P&L statement is essentially showing you the sales or revenue that you're creating from selling a certain product or from a certain service. So, for example, if a bakery sells, a bakery's revenue would be based on selling pastries. And the P&L statement also outlines the different expenses as well that is feeding into your business. The cash flow statement, and it can be a little bit confusing, the difference between P&L statement and a cash flow statement. And again, you won't really touch upon cash flow statement or balance sheet in this session, but the cash flow statement essentially measures how much cash your company is creating and how much cash your company is using. So for example, if a friend loans you money, that would show up on the cash flow statement, but it wouldn't show up on the P&L statement since it's not sales generated from a product that you're trying to sell. And lastly, the balance sheet, very simplistically, shows your assets, your liabilities, and equity in a business. But I would definitely say that when it comes to starting and running a business, all three are very important, but the P&L statement is definitely the most critical to know, at least as a first step.
Yes, the P&L statement. So that stands for your profit and loss statement. If you've seen any finance sheets in the enterprise adventure, or seen any of the guidance around your profit, your sales, and your income, this is what that is. And this goes right to the top of the financial world. So it's a really useful skill to have, now, and it'll really take you far knowing what that is, because it keeps coming up throughout your life. So next up, we're going to explain what exactly is a profit and what is a loss, and why does the P&L statement matter? So I'll hand it over to you, Hannah.
Oh, thank you. So the P and L in P&L statement obviously stands for profit and loss. And what's the difference between these two? I'm sure you guys have probably seen this across the different P&L statements that you guys have created. But the simplest way to think about it is that a profit means that you create sales, and after expenses, do you have money left over? And then that indicates that you've made a profit. Whereas a loss suggests that your expenses were greater than the amount of sales that you had. And it's quite interesting. And again, a little bit of an adjacent comment and not something that we're necessarily going to focus on. But technically, you should always focus on making a profit in your business. But during the initial years, it's very common to see losses. And the reason why is because you have so many expenses in order to start up that business. But again, the goal is always to have greater profitability. And the reason why a P&L statement matters is it helps owners figure out, really keep track of how much sales they're creating. It helps them keep track of how big are their expenses, and if there are opportunities there to really find efficiencies or to decrease the expenses so you can increase your profitability. And lastly, it's just a way for you to track if the company is improving over time. So again, a very critical statement and something that you do need to understand, and is a very valuable skill set and knowledge to have. And that obviously is, kind of the stepping stone to be able to really build a business.
Yes, thank you for that. It is really important. And I think related to that, we've just had a little question from Pratham. So before we move on, we're going to answer that. And Pratham says, how does finance management on a business level differ from a personal level?
That's a great question. And, honestly, it's not too different. So if you mean from a personal level, like managing your own personal finances, typically that can be done on your own. And what that goes back to is budgeting. So for example, during the icebreaker that we had, there was that question on what do you like to spend your money on? So from a personal budgeting perspective, it's important to be able to understand how much money you are receiving in income versus how much you're actually spending on a monthly basis, whether that's for, housing or food or clothing or other essentials. And then do you have any room for additional luxuries on top of that? And then in terms of, finance management from a business perspective, and again, it depends on what line of business you're in. There are actually financial professionals that help people budget. But from my perspective, what it means for financial management with respect to businesses, essentially, we work alongside companies to help them, really understand, how profitable is their business truly? Are there opportunities to cut down on expenses to help build up that profitability, and where we really see that company going in the future? So really projecting out those financials. And a lot of that ties into that market research component that Elizabeth had emphasized earlier, is really having a true understanding of the market that the company is operating in. So similar skill set, but just different application.
I hope that answers your question, Pratham, but we'll be taking more questions later on. So we've asked about a profit and loss statement. So we're going to go a little deeper into that now. So this is quite an intimidating looking spreadsheet, but as Hannah will explain, it's actually easier than it looks.
Yes. So this, again, P&L statements can differ and have small differences depending on how the company or the individual likes to structure it. But at the end of the day, there are some very key line items or words that should really stick out to you when you're looking at a P&L statement. So for now, we're not going to focus on these numbers. We're just going to ignore that for now. So what we really want to focus on is net sales, cost of sales, operating expenses, and net income. And obviously there are other things that matter too, but I think for the purposes of this session and just as for initial understanding, I would focus on these line items. And to go a little bit deeper into, what do these mean? We had touched upon the fact that sales is essentially the money that you're creating from selling a product or selling a service. So, going back to that bakery statement or the bakery example, selling a pastry, you receive money from a customer, that is sales. Regarding cost of sales and operating expenses, they're both expenses. They're just different types of expenses. And these are the expenses that will be subtracted from sales to determine profitability.
Mhm.
So a cost of sales is essentially expenses that are directly associated with making a product. So, for example, if going back to the bakery example, if you're making a cake, the cost of flour is going to be a cost of sales. This is a little bit different from operating expenses, which is essentially expenses that are required to run a business, but not directly related to making a product. So, for example, if you have a couple of workers or employees, that would fall under operating expenses because they're helping run the business, but it's not directly tied to the product that you're actually selling. And then lastly, net income profitability is, we've already explained, sales less expenses, and really shows you just how much money your company is generating. So definitely a lot of words being thrown out there. So obviously, if there are any questions, let me know. But again, at a high level, those are the categories that you want to focus on. So to keep it simple, net sales, expenses, profitability are the main items.
Yes. So I'm sure you all know by now that your profit is your income minus any costs you might have. So your income or sales minus your costs or expenses. So that might be things like, if you are running a bakery, it is the sale of a pastry minus the cost of the flour. And because you're going to be planning and optionally launching a business mostly on your own, you won't generally need to worry about operating expenses employing someone else, for example, right away. But who knows, you could in the future. So we're going to go through the major line items in a profit and loss statement. So we'll do it one by one. So here is that sheet.
So yeah, we had already. I might have skipped ahead and kind of ran through it, but sorry, I interrupted you.
We'll do a very brief run through. So first of all, we've got the income or the sales and the revenue. So this is the amount of money received as payment for products or services. So, as I said, someone buying a pastry, someone buying a cookie from your bakery. Next, we have the cost of sales. So the cost of flour to make cakes. They're also known as COGS. Isn't there a reason for that, Hannah, that they're called COGS?
Yes, and it may depend actually on, I think different countries may call it different things, but COGS actually stands for cost of goods sold, but it's the same thing as cost of sales. So COGS is just an abbreviation.
Okay. Next is your operating expenses, OPEX. Expenses are required to run a business, but not directly used to create a product or service. For example, workers' salaries. Are there any other operating expenses you could think of, Hannah?
Yes, there's a lot of operating expenses have to do with rent, utilities. So, for example, if you have an office or you're operating from an office location where you have to pay for rent, that would be considered. If you have to deliver your product, that transportation would also be embedded in there.
So I imagine you won't be having a whole shop right away, but if you say, rented a space that you were going to sell things in, or as you say, you were traveling from place to place, that would be an operating expense. But you can put it all in your cost. For the purposes of our finance sheets, we will just put it together as costs. But this is what a proper P&L statement looks like. And then your net income is the profit earned by a company, subtracting all expenses. So expenses used to make the product, expenses used to pay workers, to pay the rent on a building, and so on. And then other things you should know, your annual sales growth, the COGS, and operating income is your gross profit minus operating expenses. So can you go into a bit more detail on those, Hannah?
Yes. So with annual sales growth, again, that's your revenue, but it's good to see how your revenue has grown annually. So every year has your revenue grown 2% or 5%. And it's just good to have an understanding of how much growth are you achieving versus maybe what you had initially imagined. But it's a good metric. It's a good thing to look at, to evaluate when you're creating your P&L statement. Obviously, maybe not for the purposes of your projects, but just something, down the line in the future when you create your businesses and see that major success, something to definitely take a look at. And regarding gross margin and operating income, again, I think, we can simplify and just assume, sales expenses to profitability, but gross margin, again, is just your sales minus the cost of goods sold. And the operating income is just your, is more with respect to the operating expenses. But to oversimplify, when you look at that percent of sales, it's good to see that continue to grow, because it means your expenses are going down at the same, it means that your sales are increasing at a faster rate than your expenses are increasing. Hopefully that makes sense, but at a high level, that's something that is also good to keep track of.
Yes, hopefully your sales will be increasing higher than any costs, and that's how you make profit. But yes, that's the simplified version. If anyone has any more questions, please free to leave them in the chat or the Q&A. Otherwise, we will move on to our example. Okay, going to move on. So next up is our example scenario, running a lemonade stand. There it is. I'm sure you've all heard of this.
Yeah, and hopefully this example and running through it together will help make everything I just said make a little bit more sense and a little bit more applicable. But would love to hear actually from anyone, if anyone wants to offer up their thoughts. But what do you think are some things that are needed to run a lemonade stand?
Yes, so anything that someone needs if they think, I'm going to run a lemonade stand.
Lemons. It's a good
lemons. Yes.
Very critical.
You can't make lemonade without a few lemons. But anything else, you do actually need quite a lot apart from lemons. Anyone have any ideas of what they might need? I'll give you a hint. It's also in the picture.
A banner
to advertise it. Yes. Yes. You'll need decoration and, you'll need marketing and branding, I suppose. What makes your lemonade stand stand out? Huh.
Does anyone know what lemonade has to be held in?
Proper pricing psychology. Yes. Well, that is true. I mean, yeah, you have to think about the price you're going to pay for your lemon, considering all your other expenses. But yeah, anyone else? Okay, we're going to go and see an example of what a profit and loss statement for a lemonade stand might look like. So remember that income is your price per product multiplied by the number of products sold. So keep this in mind when we look at our profit and loss statement that's just about to come up. So for example, if we do sell 100 cups of lemonade in 1 month at 50 cents each, what is our income? You could answer that now if you're very good at quick maths. Okay, well, we're going to see it for ourselves. So next up, this is your 3-month P&L for a lemonade stand. And the certain points here are blanked out. And I want you to keep this in mind because when you come to get your certificate of attendance, you'll be answering these questions. So does anyone have any idea about, for example, if you sold 100 cups of lemonade in a month for 50 cents each, what would you end up with? Okay. Oh, $50. Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And as you can see, your expenses and the overall income is not the same. So you'll see it's not the same figures month 1, month 2, and month 3. Can anyone tell me what's changed? Oh, the price of the lemonade mix. Yes, it has changed. So in month 3, it's gone up by 10 cents. Anything else? What about things that you have to pay for at the start? Yes, the expenses for the decor. Yes, other prices except the lemonade mix are zero. That's because you've already bought your starting expenses, but you won't need to buy them again. So we're going to see the filled in profit and loss statement for this lemonade stand. Here it is. So would you like to explain a bit about this, Hannah?
Yes. So, from mathematically, from a calculation perspective, as we talked about before, that sales number is really just the number of cups sold, which is your product, times the price per product. So that's how 100 times 50 cents, $50. The total expenses is just adding up all of your expenses, the lemonade mix, the cup, the tape, marker, and poster board. And when you subtract 50 and 21, 50, for example, in month 1, you arrive at a net income of 28.50. So I wanted to point out a couple of things, and I think that you guys already did a great job of pointing out kind of the differences on a month-to-month basis. But a couple of things. So as you can see, the price per cup has increased about 10 cents. And again, it kind of goes back actually to one of you who had said pricing psychology, but essentially the more competitive or more in demand your product is, typically you can increase the prices. And there are many different reasons why you would do that. But as you can see, it's not just the number of cups that are getting sold that is going up, but it's also the price, which is why your sales number has improved pretty meaningfully and has increased pretty well. And in terms of, when you go look at all these expenses, as you can see, for example, in cups in month 3, it's $0. Tape is $0. Month 2, month 3, the marker, etc. It's because these expenses, there are certain expenses that are less regular in nature. So, for example, if you buy a marker in month 1, you likely won't need to continue buying a marker in month 2 and buy another in month 3. And again, this is about budgeting and about understanding what you need in terms of expenses in order to really run your company. So as you can see, when you go down to net income, we have 28.50, 47.78. And if you look right below that, it says profit margin percent. So we're going from 57 to 78.3 to 92.9. This is an example, and we had pointed to this earlier, but this is an example of, a major improvement in profitability from a percentage perspective. So again, this is the 28.50 divided by 50. And this is always a good sign because it means that you are being very cautious with your expenses while still growing your sales in a very, robust or a very strong way. So yeah, just a couple of, observations that I really wanted to point out. And I think that as you continue your projects and as you, kind of do the follow-up activity after, you'll see something similar to this. So hopefully this all makes sense and kind of, ties back to what Elizabeth and I had discussed earlier.
Yes, I hope that answers everyone's questions and shows you exactly how your expenses and your income might change from month to month. I hear a lot of adventurers say, oh, but the expense of launching my business it's a lot. I have to think of the branding. I have to think about, advertising my business, going from place to place. But, if your income is high enough, and you do turn a profit, then eventually, then it'll, you will turn a profit and the money will make itself back. So this is what is happening in this very successful lemonade stand. So everyone, I want you to share your thoughts. And if you have any questions on anything that has come so far, this is the time for you to ask any questions you may have. And if you'd like more time, or like more in detailed questions, you don't have enough time to write everything you want to say right now, then please feel free to send it to info@enterpriseadventure.org, and I can get you in contact with even Hannah if it's like a very detailed question, and we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have. We can't give you a detailed step-by-step on how to run your own business, but I hope that this will help you a lot. So yes, thank you so much, Hannah, and we look forward to seeing all your questions. First of all, I'm also going to put a 2-minute feedback form in the chat. So I'm going to just try to post it here. So I hope you can all see I posted a link to a feedback form in the chat, but to everyone who's attended, you'll also get it emailed to you along with the recording of this masterclass and the link of where you can get your certificate of attendance. So if you've been paying attention, you'll be able to answer the questions in the quiz and get a certificate for your time. So we have a question already from Pratham, who says, with what perspective or psychology should financing be practiced? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah. Sorry, can I read the question again, actually?
With what perspective or psychology should you practice finance?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. I think that there are so many different ways to approach that question, but, again, tying it. So I believe somebody had earlier asked the difference between personal finance versus financing for a business. So from a personal investing perspective and a budgeting perspective, it's about ensuring that your income is greater than the amount of expenses that you're incurring on a monthly basis. You always want to have money left over, and that money can be used, obviously for savings. You can invest that. But definitely very important to be cautious when it comes to your own personal budgeting. And I think that principle and perspective definitely applies to the business side of things as well. And I'm going to speak more specifically, for example, running a business or within private equity, but that mindset definitely applies in that scenario as well. However, different than personal investing, a lot of times in order to grow a company, you will need to sometimes be at a loss in the very beginning. Again, I think for the purposes of your projects, always just focus on being profitable. But again, in the very beginning, when you have these very necessary expenses and you don't know how much sales you're actually going to generate from your product, because a lot of that requires really going out there and testing the product. Sometimes it is necessary to step outside that comfort zone of being cautious, and you need to unfortunately incur more expenses so that you have the setup in order to even grow your business. So again, I think that it's about balancing being cautious while also making the necessary investments in your business in order to really grow that. And hopefully in the future, you can be, when those expenses kind of even out a little bit more and you're growing sales at a faster rate, then you're going to see more of that profitability. And a lot of that ties back to the necessary investments that you have to make within your company. So a couple of different approaches to how to take this on. But again, I think it all ties back to just having a really good understanding of what is needed in your business. Is there a market for your business? Who is the customer? How to market the product, But yeah, and then that all ties into how that will be financed. So hopefully, very long-winded response to your question, but hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Hannah. I don't think that was long-winded. I think it was very helpful. So yes, Pratham says thank you. So does anyone else have a question? Oh yes, Deecha has a question. And Deecha says, is finance primarily about mathematics?
So I would say that finance requires a lot of different things, but mathematics is definitely probably the number one most useful skill to have is mathematics. But again, so taking a step back, actually, math is very important within finance, but obviously there are calculators and Excel. So a lot of ways to kind of do that. It's a little bit less manual, but I think actually what matters more in finance is just understanding how everything flows into one another and how everything impacts each other. So, for example, understanding that the more expenses you have or the more money you have to put into buying equipment and et cetera, like if you're growing your business and you're hiring workers, just having an understanding of how that will actually impact your statements, I actually would think is a much more important skill to have. So just having a true and strong understanding of how financial statements work. But yes, definitely leans very heavily into the mathematics as well.
I think that's a good way of putting it. So yes, math is very important, but also, as you say, understanding how it all fits together and flows. So growing up, I wasn't great at math, but I like to think of it and of finances more of in a visual way. So it might help drawing a sort of a map diagram to see how everything fits together, if that makes it easier for you. And we do have another question. So Deecha says, thank you. That's a really good question. Nomila says, what are the different types of ways to market your business? And how does that relate to finances as well? I think marketing and finance do come together quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually think that there was previously a masterclass on social media marketing, which is a great tool to use for marketing. But there are many different ways to market your business. And I would say that the first thing you have to think about is what kind of customer are you trying to reach? So, for example, if you're trying to go more local, just that could be as simple as passing out flyers for your business. But if you're obviously trying to reach people in different areas, that may require, more social media or television or etc. And I would definitely say social media is one of the easiest and also the best ways to reach your customer base. But again, it depends really on who you're trying to reach, what age they are. Are they more local? Are they in different areas? And then how that ties into finance. Again, it's an expense. And this is one area where we had talked about this before, but a lot of times when you start a business, there are necessary investments that you have to make. And typically marketing is one of them because it is the way to reach your customer. And that is the way to create sales for your company. So yeah, but again, a lot of different ways to market. It just really depends on, what the product is, what the service is, who the customer is, but would definitely, and if you haven't watched the social media seminar, would definitely highly encourage that as well, because that is definitely one of the most commonly used tools within companies that I even see.
So yes, it does come up a lot. There are lots of places, yes, you can advertise on social media for free, but even things as simple as, say you designed a flyer, which you do in the graphic design masterclass, and you want to print it. So you have to factor in the expenses for printing those flyers. Or if you want to put a banner up on a website, you often have to have a charge for that if you want to run banner advertisements. So that all ties into your finance as well. Does anyone have any more questions? Thank you, Nomila. Any more questions? Give it a few more seconds, 30 more seconds. If you do have a more detailed one, you can email it to us, but if you'd like to have it answered live, please do so. Okay, well, it seems like it's time to wrap up. So everyone, make sure you check your email inbox soon, later today or tomorrow for the recording, and the link to get your certificate of attendance, and the link to the feedback form will also be in that email, although it is also in the chat bar. I just want to give a big thank you to Hannah for being such a great presenter today. And do you have any closing words for us, Hannah?
Yes, no, I mean, I thank you, Elizabeth, and I personally want to thank all of you for asking such great questions and being so engaged. I know that it can be a little bit overwhelming, but hopefully this will help you in your projects and was understandable. And, obviously, if there are any additional questions after that come up, I'm always happy to help, but really appreciate that you guys were such an engaging audience. So thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone so much for being so interactive and doing such great questions. So I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for attending. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.